I'm Daryl Owens. Welcome to A World of Difference. Seneca, the Roman philosopher, observed that one of the most beautiful qualities of true friendship is to understand and to be understood. Wise words that put a finger on the conundrum often facing neurodivergent children. Many long for friendship, but struggle with understanding the nuts and bolts of being a pal. Meanwhile, potential friends often eye-roll neurodivergent interactions as weird and move on. For kids with autism, ADHD, and other learning differences who struggle with deciphering body language and facial expressions, forging friendships can be an uphill struggle. Research shows that as a result, children with autism, for example, sing the lonesome blues more than their neurotypical peers. Here's the good news. Parents can step in and tutor their neurodivergent kiddos in developing lasting, fulfilling relationships. On this episode, a group of young neurodivergent individuals with the Colorado Autism Group relate the ups and downs that youngsters who learn differently experience while forging relationships. Next, our expert panel explores ways that parents can support their children from an early age through college on their friendship journey. Later, you'll meet our latest difference maker, whose love of stories overpowered her struggles reading the words that shaped the fabulous tales she loved. But first, we sit in with a group discussion at Firefly Autism in Colorado as a group of young people who learn differently share the trials and triumphs of forging friendships. Correspondent Louisa Ardelia brings us the story.
Learning differences can make it hard to build and maintain meaningful relationships. For people on the spectrum, it may feel as though everyone else intuitively knows how to interact in social situations, and they may feel out of place.
I guess it takes some time making friends. You have to warm up to them. Having a conversation, keeping it going. Because I've sometimes, I'll just stop and then, I don't know what to say. And so it gets a little awkward.
Generally, I have a hard time getting to know people at all. So once I begin to know them better, then I can actually start interacting with them more. But at first, I just kind of wait for them to come to me.
These young adults are learning to tackle social situations with the help of Firefly Autism of Colorado. Through its home programs, therapies, and social skills groups, the organization helps individuals of all ages build their communication skills and learn ways to create positive relationships with friends, family, and acquaintances.
Think back the very first time you walked in here. Can you think back to the very first time you walked in? You're like, oh my gosh, right?
Yeah.
And now we walk in and we're friends and we get along. And I think it's really cool that we don't have to worry about I'm going to get judged or someone's going to look at me differently because I think different or I have a funny answer or I say something off, right?
To me, I feel like I'm warmed up a little bit more and I feel like, I can be myself here. And I just feel a little bit more comfortable so I don't have to hide certain stuff from other people.
Through this journey, it's also important for parents to focus not just on their child's learning differences, but also take time to acknowledge and nurture their strengths, both in learning and socializing. Here, our Firefly facilitator shows us how to approach that conversation.
Emma, did your parents talk to you about strengths?
Yes.
What did they say?
That I'm really good at English. And if I try hard, on tests, then they will be glad I try my best.
Sully, I think you have a lot of strengths. What's one that you want to identify with?
Well, I'm very quiet, so I can mostly understand what's going on most of the time. So I don't miss things that other people do because I'm focused most of the time.
You are very observant and focused. It's an excellent trait to have. And Ben, what's one of your strengths?
I don't know if I would call it a strength, but sympathizing or empathizing with other people if they're sad or something I can make them feel a little bit better. Not a whole lot, but I can just listen to them. That might make them feel better. So I think that might be one of them.
That is definitely one of them. Excellent. Very cool.
While putting our best selves forward can be intimidating, it can also lead to life-enriching experiences and relationships. So for those young people with learning differences that are venturing out into the world, here's some parting advice from our panel.
Do what works for you. Make your own decisions.
Do what feels best.
For A World of Difference, I'm Luisa Ardila.
Thanks, Louisa. Next, our experts take a closer look at helping parents help their kids forge friendships. Dr. Nikki Nance is a psychotherapist and an associate professor of human services and psychology at Beacon College in Leesburg, Florida, America's first higher education institution to award bachelor's degrees primarily to neurodivergent students. Dr. Holly Schiff is a licensed clinical psychologist practicing in Connecticut and New York, specializing in treating children, adolescents, and young adults. Dr. Schiff also conducts neuropsychological evaluations and psychoeducational assessments while working closely with schools and universities. Welcome to the show, ladies. We're going to start this conversation with Dr. Nance. Dr. Nance, why are friendships important for all children?
Friendships are actually part of the developmental process. They start building interpersonal skills that are essential for the rest of life throughout adulthood. With little kids, they're going to start playing next to each other, parallel play. That's kind of the seed of what's going to end up being interactive, understanding how the other person is functioning, checking out somebody else's responses. So that's why it's important.
All right. Well, when it comes to this process, do parents truly have to start at the beginning, meaning helping their child to understand what a friend is?
I think at the very beginning of their life and at the very beginning of what is friendship, you would probably be able to start anytime. If you're capable to communicate stranger danger to your child, you should be able to communicate familiarity to your children too. Social media has turned the word friend into a verb, so it's confusing for a lot of adults. They don't know what friends are. You need to differentiate that with kids from who are your classmates, who are your teammates, and then teaching your own children boundaries and teaching them how to check what other people are comfortable with. Those are all friendship skills, and they provide safety in a relationship that allows people to become more and more intimate in that relationship.
Thank you, Dr. Nance. Dr. Schiff, athletes often visualize foul shots going through the hoop or an extra point going through the goalpost. Should parents help their children learn friendship ropes by scripting dialogue or drawing out the flow of a conversation to help their kiddo connect with the basics of friendship speak?
Absolutely. I actually like to use conversation maps as a guide to help kind of initiate and maintain social interactions with peers. So it actually provides a visual framework for how a conversation might go, and you could follow the flow literally kind of like a flow chart. So you would start with a greeting, something like, hey, hi, hello, how are you doing? My name is blank, and a starting comment or a question. So how was your weekend? Or, oh, I really like your backpack. And then kind of having a conversation, taking turns, that back and forth, asking questions, showing that you're interested, and then learning kind of how to end a conversation and wrap it up, so there's not just that awkward stalling. So it's I got to go to class, or maybe I'll talk to you later, and then saying bye. And so I think scripting dialogue can also be helpful, so you actually become better acquainted with the basics of friendship speak.
And is practicing once enough, or does it require frequent role playing with the child?
I would say it requires frequent role playing, and that rehearsal is definitely important because it can actually ease any fears or nerves that the child might have, because it's actually acting as exposure to how the conversation with a friend might go. And doing this more often and repeatedly will increase their comfort level as well as their confidence. And like with anything else, I would say practice makes perfect.
Thank you, Dr. Schiff. Dr. Nance, to eliminate the cold calling aspect of forging friendships, should parents of neurodiverse kids rig the game, so to speak, by leveraging their child's interests and enrolling them in classes, groups, camps, etc., where they might meet like-minded children?
They really need to nurture both of those things. It's not realistic to eliminate cold calling or things that could happen spontaneously. And in fact, if you think about a definition of friendship, it's spontaneous. Usually you don't set up a lot of steps to making a specific friend. There's a connection that happens spontaneously for a lot of people. On the other hand, all of the extracurriculars that you're talking about, you might not assure that there's going to be a connection, but it's certainly going to open up more opportunities for that to happen. And those things help to build other skills, such as taking turns, working in a team with other people, gives them social learning, lets them see how other people go about making friendships. And it kind of gives you the grist for the discussion mill about who are friends, who are teammates, how do you pursue something, how do you get it to go further, and how do you feel that connection, what does that mean?
Dr. Nance, any suggestions for families who can't afford such extracurriculars as camps and such?
Yeah, play dates and arrange activities yourself, inviting people to your home that have kids. And at any age, even when you're into preteens, a child might not initiate that they would like to have some friends come over to play games or watch movies or whatever they are interested in, but you certainly can facilitate that. School activities, and in some places there are certainly programs through city parks, faith-based programs. A lot of times in the summer, there are a lot of opportunities. And probably parents will feel more comfortable with things that they can kind of look over. I think something overlooked sometimes is relatives, cousins that might be a little bit older. People that you might not necessarily see all the time, but if you would initiate something, they certainly would come through and benefit from that themselves.
All right. Dr. Schiff, so I suspect that forging friendship for neurodiverse kids will be a work in progress, and making friends at age 5 looks different than it does at age 15. How do parents help kids develop age-appropriate social skills, for instance, for elementary, middle, and high school, and even college?
Yeah, absolutely. You're completely right. And so I think developing age-appropriate social skills is definitely important, because each of those developmental stages that you mentioned can look quite different when we think about, making friends, socializing, what that dynamic looks like. So if you think about elementary school and younger kids, it's kind of the parents being friends with each other, kind of acting as social directors, facilitating the play dates, staying on hand to make sure it goes smoothly. And so for the kids, learning about sharing, taking turns, learning the rules of games, abiding by the rules, open-mindedness. Maybe I love dinosaurs, but, my friend doesn't. Problem-solving skills and cooperation. So maybe I'm playing with blocks and my friend also wants to play with blocks. So it's kind of learning to navigate that conflict. And also, younger children are definitely sensitive to social rejection. They care about being included and belonging. And so as we get into middle school, now we're reading body language a little bit more, the nonverbal cues, the facial expressions. And unfortunately, we might also be dealing with some bullying, teasing, things like that. So self-awareness is really important, social awareness, especially as you might be hanging out in smaller groups, less so kind of on the one-on-one play date type of things. In high school, it's more about the shared interests and shared experience. Perhaps you're on a sports team together, extracurricular activities, after-school clubs, or you meet people through, friend of a friend. Active listening is really important to kind of, maintain friendships here, not being distracted. Everyone's kind of on their, cell phones and social media. You want to be present in a conversation, kind of engage in small talk, have that back and forth. Managing conflict is also really important at that stage, and the reciprocal conversation. As I mentioned, social media also enters into the picture. So that, social media etiquette is kind of its own brand of social skills that you have to learn how to navigate, and how to effectively communicate, especially while, dealing with adults, teachers. And so learning to respect others' opinions while also sharing your own, as well as, perspective taking, being able to empathize with others. So when we get into college, that's where we kind of want to broaden our social horizons a little bit. It's a different setting, it's a different environment. So now we're on a college campus. So here it's, maybe finding someone to sit with at the dining hall. And if you're living on campus, navigating kind of the dorm life, those friendships, what your relationship with your roommate might look like. And we're more independent here. So making your own plans, your own routine, your own schedule, getting involved in clubs, activities, and also, still communicating effectively, not only with, other peers, but also professors as well.
All right. Well, Dr. Nance, making friends is one thing, but keeping them is quite another. How can parents support their children in that regard?
Maintaining friendships, a lot of adults aren't really good at the things that, if you think about the times that parents themselves say, I wish I had included somebody or haven't spoken to somebody for a long time. I think giving kids reminders and just sharing their experiences, if they have a friend and things seem to have worked out for a while and they seem to be neglectful of that, they're children and they're going to miss that opportunity if you don't say to them, have you spoken to so-and-so lately? Or do you think that your friend would like to come over for this? They're interested in that thing. So just giving those prompts as you go along. And always being able to reframe for kids, especially as they get older, if they feel that a friendship is being neglected by the other person, to say to them, well, sometimes you forget too. And that doesn't mean the friendship is over. And given a lot of good examples of your own experiences with friends that maybe you don't see for a long time, and that real friendships actually will pick up right where they left off. So that's given kids instruction as well as hope and affirmation about their friendship skills.
Thank you. Dr. Schiff, any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, absolutely. So actually, to piggyback off of that, but also kind of the flip of that, I think it's also important for parents to kind of provide that psychoeducation just from experience of it's also okay to lose friends. I mean, you might outgrow a friend, they might outgrow you, or a friendship might have just run its course and, people kind of distance. So I think also kind of understanding that we don't just have to hang on to people and friendships just for the sake of having friends, because it may actually be detrimental.
All right. And Dr. Nance, Dr. Schiff kind of anticipated my next question, which is kids will be kids. And despite all the practice and your child's best efforts, at some point, some child may reject your child's friendship overtures. So how do parents prepare a child for that and come to the rescue with positive reinforcement after the brush off?
Yeah, there are two parts to that question. One is how to prepare a child, and the other one is how to come to the rescue. So I'm going to handle them just that way. And I would say overall for parents, a lot of times the parent's anxiety is going to bring more anxiety to the child than actually the rejection. And some of that comes from having a neurodiverse child. You have to kind of divorce yourself from the idea that only neurodiverse kids are getting the brush off, or that your child is getting the brush off because of their difference. Most kids are going to get a brush off at least sometime in their young lives. And you don't want to make that about their difference. You want to make that about just their feelings. How to prepare them, grabbing at all the teachable moments that you can, and being a good model. If somebody is rude to you, handling it with grace and not portraying yourself as the victim, demonstrating some really good social skills, and even saying, I wish I would have handled that better. Gives the kid permission and some real good modeling. Rehearsing what to say if they're rejected, knowing how to disarm other people without portraying yourself as a victim or without being confrontational. If you aren't good at it, they won't be either. So I think that your modeling, again, is a lot of it walking people through and giving them really good answers. I mean, especially as they get to be adolescents, what I experience with the college students is if I am teaching some things about assertion or just assertiveness skills, a lot of times if I give an example of an answer, they say, oh my God, I could use that. I could even say that at home.
Watch the full Ask the Expert segment on our website at awodtv.org if you want to learn more about helping kids with learning differences build friendships. You can also watch or listen on Facebook, YouTube, or on your favorite podcasting platform. Next, let's reveal our latest difference maker. After her family fled Cuba and Castro's tyranny in the 1960s, Carmen Agrediti landed in a small Georgia town. There, she ran headlong into the tyranny of the written word and numbers. For years, she believed she was dumb. Later, as an adult, she discovered two things. First, she wasn't dumb at all. She was dyslexic. And second, being able to picture the world and communicate through writing children's books would open a new chapter in helping her see her difference in a different way. Senior correspondent Brad Kuhn brings us her story.
I'm going to introduce you all to a very special lady. Her name is Carmen Dede. She is a renowned author and storyteller.
Carmen Agredidi was born in Havana and migrated to Decatur, Georgia via Mexico with her family when she was 3 years old. She was one of hundreds of thousands who fled the island nation in the 1960s to avoid Castro's communist re-education camps.
When we arrived in Miami, we were processed as we're all Cubans, and so there was a procedure. And then when we were finally able to go to El Refugio, it was called the Refuge. It was a building where the Cuban refugees went, and they looked through lists of people to try and find relatives. They were able to get clothes and find work.
Learning was difficult, and not just because of the language barrier.
I go to first grade, and my English is serviceable, but I don't understand much of what's being said. And it's in Southern English, a dialect I adore. But as a child, it was trying. I am probably 30 before I find out that I don't hear phonemes clearly. I don't hear sounds clearly, those little tiny sounds that make up every word. I don't hear them very well. In fact, by the time I'm nearly 30, that's when I discover that I've been lip reading most of my life. So when I go to first grade, I'm completely lost. And these were not the times of, this era was not a time when, it was a harsher environment. And I remember that you had to put your hands out and she would whack them with a yardstick. Now that hadn't happened to me, but I had seen it happen to other children. And one day I stayed after school because I couldn't do my numbers. We had just started adding. And the numbers to me, I didn't have the issue of numbers flipping, but I just didn't understand them. I just didn't understand anything, really. I mean, if I'm honest, I was somewhat feral as a child. And I understood the natural world. I understood stories because I grew up with an oral tradition that was rich beyond reckoning. But the writing was so hard and I couldn't do the numbers. I couldn't cipher. I couldn't do the addition. And she told me to stand up, and she didn't ask me to put my hands out. She told me I had a skirt that went down beneath my knees, to pull my skirt up. So she was going to strike my shins. And I looked at her, and I don't know what kind of child I must have been. I've tried to, get a sense. I just looked at her and I said, no. And then I ran away. She never, ever did anything like that again with me. She mostly left me alone. She did eventually teach me how to read phonetically. And that same woman that was so scary on the one hand, and not particularly warm, on the other hand, had a certain intuition in a pedagogical way. As a teacher, she had certain intuition, because when I was not learning the sound, like to read, she finally said, "What is the problem?" And I said, "I don't understand these words." And I had been reading already in Spanish, believe it or not, but it's like Latin. Each letter had a clear sound. You could look at it, la, la, ah, ah. Here you had diphthongs, which sounds like a bad bathing suit, right? So I thought, I'm never going to get this. And she had been teaching sight reading. We had all these little cards. Didn't work. So she brought out this old battered poster, and she started teaching me after school. And this time after school, she was very patient. All the sounds, all the letter sounds. And then we went to, when two letters were together, what those sounds were. And that's when I started to slowly grasp reading.
Once she cracked the code, Dede found she had the tools to put into words the folk tales she'd grown up with. And once she had those tools, she worked diligently to master them.
I started telling stories when my girls were little, volunteering at their schools, just as a mom. And at the same time, because there was a confluence, I had also come up with an idea for a story as a picture book. There was an Atlanta publisher that was wonderful, Peachtree Publishers. And I called and asked to speak to one of the editors and told her my idea. And she said, "Well, why don't you write it down and send it to me?" And then I anguished over it for weeks. You can imagine. Well, I can tell it to you, but write it down. So I did write it, and I remember printing it out on a dot matrix printer. It's dating myself quite a bit. And I took it in person, and I met her and I handed it to her. And then one day I got a phone call, and she said, her name was Susan Thurman. I'll always remember her. She said, "So Carmen, I have some news for you." She said, "We love your story. Now, I'm an editor and I would be your editor, so we're going to work on it. But we're going to offer you a contract." And I felt my knees buckle. And I broke out in little beads of sweat across my lip. And I had a white knuckle grip on that phone. And I remember just saying, "Well, that's really wonderful. I'll call you back." And then I hung up. It was an old avocado green phone on the wall that had been my mother's. And I did the dance. You know, I was so happy. It was so incredible. But see, I was 28. I had not yet been diagnosed. I just knew that I loved reading. I loved words. I loved stories. But it was harder for me to write or read than anyone I knew. And how could that be when I had such a passion for it? And that's how I ended up getting tested. When that book was accepted, I found a therapist and I said, "I need you to help me figure out my own brain."
Her work has won several awards and honors. Hamilton creator Lin-Manuel Miranda selected one of her books as his favorite children's story to read in Spanish as part of Operation Read Aloud, a University of Minnesota literacy initiative.
Over time, I learned to accept dyslexia not as something that was a burden that I had to carry, but as an intrinsic part of myself, my brain, the way it's wired, and the unique gift it has given me, the way I approach the world, the way I approach learning, the way I approach others. What does that mean? Well, the way I see what we think of the norm in learning is someone who goes through the woods, A to B, down a straight path. And it's quick and it's easy and it gets them there in a tick. Dyslexics, we take the scenic route. Now, we too arrive at that point. Sometimes it takes us a little longer, but I assure you it's always much more interesting.
For a World of Difference, I'm Brad Kuhn.
Thanks, Brad, and congratulations, Carmen Agrediti, for making a difference. And that does it for this edition of A World of Difference. I'm Daryl Owens. I'll see you back here next time. You can watch episodes of A World of Difference on the Beacon College Facebook and YouTube channels and on the show's website, awodtv.org. The website also provides tip sheets and other resources for your parenting journey. And you can listen to the show on the go on Spotify, Breaker, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, and other popular podcasting platforms. Thank you for watching and supporting A World of Difference.